All right, so today we're diving deep into a feeling that I think a lot of us, kind of struggle with from time to time, and that is despondency. We're going to try to figure out what it really means, how it's maybe different from just, feeling depressed, and even, where the word comes from.
Oh, cool.
We've got some great sources for this.
Okay.
We've got Health Central, we've got Merriam-Webster, of course. Yeah. We've got the etymological experts over at etymonline.com.
Love Etymonline.
And and then some folks who are really good at explaining things over at Make Your Point.
Awesome.
So the goal here is to really give you a much clearer understanding of what it means to feel despondent.
Okay.
And try to do it without, getting too clinical or jargony.
Right. Yeah, because those words, despondent, depressed, sometimes it does feel kind of blurry. What's the difference?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And actually, Health Central, right off the bat kind of jumps into this and even uses the analogy of, a head cold versus the flu. They're saying, maybe despondency is kind of like the everyday, I've got a little bit of the blahs versus, full blown, I'm really sick with depression.
Okay, I see.
But I think what they're also saying is, that's kind of a good starting point, but it doesn't really, it doesn't fully explain either one, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. It gives you a sense of maybe different levels of intensity, but not really the core of what those things feel like.
Totally.
So to get a little bit more into that, I think it's helpful to look at how Health Central describes depression in general.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
So they lay out, a pretty big list of signs of depression. They talk about feeling weary all the time, feeling indifferent,
right,
lacking motivation, even for things that you usually enjoy. They talk about work performance going down, feeling restless, irritable, even just staring off into space sometimes.
Yeah.
They mention, it's even hard to get ready in the morning. Even that much effort can feel really, really difficult.
Right. And it's not just having a bad day.
Right.
They're talking about a sort of continuing sense of gloom.
Yeah.
That things just kind of always feel negative and you don't really see that changing.
Totally. And it's not just in your head either. They talk about physical stuff too.
Okay.
Changes in appetite. Maybe you're eating a lot more. Maybe you're getting way less. Your weight's fluctuating. Sleep's all messed up. Either you can't fall asleep or you can't stay asleep. Or maybe you're sleeping too much, but you still don't feel rested.
Right.
And they talk about, physically moving slower, you just feel heavy and you're agitated, kind of uncomfortable in your own skin.
Yeah.
Even physical aches and pains can be part of it. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting that they said was just this constant tiredness, physically and emotionally, you're just wiped out.
Yeah.
It really paints a picture of, how much depression can weigh on you.
It does.
It even makes you want to withdraw from people. It feels easier to not even try to connect.
Yeah.
And you're just pessimistic about everything,
Yeah.
You can't even make a decision, even a simple decision. And then you're oh, I should have done that other thing. It's just everything's a drag.
It's that feeling of being trapped almost.
Yeah.
You can't get out of this and you're trying to hide it from everyone.
Totally. And this is where it starts to get really interesting because Health Central actually says straight up that despondency is part of all types of depression. Especially in serious cases like major depressive episodes where it's really deep and it lasts for a long time.
Right.
So even though we're focusing on despondency itself today, it's important to keep in mind this is definitely connected to, bigger mental health issue.
Right, exactly. It's not just a word in isolation.
Totally. Okay, so now that we've got that kind of picture of depression in mind, let's zero in on despondent.
Okay.
Merriam-Webster has a pretty clear definition. They say it's feeling or showing extreme discouragement, dejection, or depression. And they've got some pretty strong synonyms for it too, despairing, desperate, forlorn, hopeless.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are heavy words. And what really strikes me about Merriam-Webster's definition is, that emphasis on extreme.
Right. Yeah.
It's not just oh, I'm feeling a little bit down. This is a really, really intense feeling.
Yeah.
And they even use the phrase, a deep dejection arising from a conviction of the uselessness of further effort. And that really gets to the heart of it, right?
It does. It's that feeling like why even try?
Yeah.
You know? Nothing's going to change anyway.
Yeah, it's that feeling of futility. Like, what's the point?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is so heavy, you know? And Merriam-Webster gives us some interesting examples of how despondent gets used in sentences.
Okay.
You know, like they talk about somebody being despondent about their health, or even Homer Simpson, right? Becoming despondent after losing his job.
Yeah.
Which I think we can all relate to, right? Like, we've all had those moments.
We've all been there.
Then they've got, you know, writers feeling despondent about the future of literature.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just picture, you know, like those despondent fans at a sporting event. Like, you know, you can just see that look of disappointment.
Yeah, it's palpable.
It's palpable, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think those examples really help to, you know, to make it real, right?
They do.
Like, it's not just about these big, huge life crises. It can be about all kinds of things.
Right. And even the newer examples they give, you know, from just this year are really interesting.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about those.
So, you know, there's one about somebody having just like a disastrous performance and feeling despondent about it, or a facial expression becoming a meme and people feeling despondent about that.
Oh, wow.
Which, you know, kind of speaks to the fact that even seemingly small things can trigger this big feeling, right?
Yeah.
And then there's one about motorsport storytellers feeling despondent about a race outcome.
Oh, interesting.
Which I think is kind of a cool example because it shows how wide-ranging the situations can be.
Yeah, totally.
You know, it's not just about, like, your personal life.
Yeah.
It can be about these bigger events or things you're passionate about.
Totally. So where does this intense feeling come from?
Yeah.
Like what's the root of it?
Well, let's get into the etymology.
Okay, let's do it.
So Edmund Line tells us that despondent first popped up in the 1690s.
Okay.
And it comes from the Latin word despondentum, which is the present participle of despondere.
Okay.
And despondere itself is kind of interesting because it has this double meaning.
Oh, okay.
So on the one hand, it means to give up, lose heart, resign. But it also means to promise in marriage.
That's interesting.
It is interesting.
That those two things would be connected in the same word.
Yeah, but it's that first set of meanings, you know, the giving up part.
Yeah.
That really informs how we think about despondency today.
Okay.
And then make your point actually helps us break down despondere even further.
Okay, yeah.
So the prefix de means away.
Okay.
And then spondere means to promise. And, you know, sponder is also where we get words like sponsor.
Oh, interesting.
That's somebody who makes a pledge.
Right.
And spouse.
Oh, wow.
Someone you make a promise to.
Right.
So, you know, to despond is almost like to let go of your promises, to give up on them.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. But as Make Your Point also points out, like the modern meaning of despondent has this much heavier emotional weight to it.
Yeah.
Than just the practical act of giving up on something.
Right.
It's that feeling of being, you know, downhearted, sick at heart, depressed, hopeless.
Yeah.
And this is where the Latin phrase animam despondere becomes really important.
Okay, yeah, animam despondere. So what does that mean?
So it literally means to give up your soul, to let your spirit be cast down.
Wow.
Yeah, so that phrase, as Make Your Point explains, is really what shaped this deeper meaning of despondent. Like, it's not just about abandoning a task, it's about this profound loss of inner spirit.
Wow, so it's really about like the core of who you are almost.
Yeah, exactly. It adds this layer of like emotional devastation to the word.
Wow. Okay, so is it the same as despair then?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
And the Edmund Line entry for despondent actually has a really helpful distinction that comes from the Century Dictionary from way back in 1897.
Oh, wow.
So it says, despondency is a loss of hope sufficient to produce a loss of courage and a disposition to relax or relinquish effort. The despondent person tending to sink into spiritless inaction. Despair means a total loss of hope. Despondency does not.
Okay, so there's a difference there.
There is.
They're not the same thing. It sounds like they both have this lack of hope,
right.
but despair is like the absolute end.
Yeah.
And despondency maybe is is not quite there yet.
Yeah, it's like, how much hope have you lost?
Yeah, yeah.
With despondency, you might have lost a lot of courage. You might feel like giving up.
Right.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that, like, every last shred of hope is gone.
Right. So there's still maybe like a tiny, tiny little flicker.
Maybe, yeah. And I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah.
Because it might mean that reaching out for help or trying to take even small steps forward feels a little bit less impossible.
Right.
Than if you're in that state of absolute despair.
Totally. And Make Your Point really drives home just how intense this word despondent is.
Mm-hmm.
They actually describe it as an intense and formal adjective.
Okay.
And they say it's perfect for describing, that total, utter, rock bottom hopelessness that we see, not just in people, but in their moods, their attitudes, their outlooks, even in creative works.
Right. And they have this really interesting example of someone who's busy taking care of things after their spouse dies instead of being despondent, which I think speaks to the fact that, despondency isn't always like the immediate response to something really terrible.
Yeah.
And then they also talk about how even sad children's literature often avoids like total despondency.
Right.
There's usually a thread of hope.
Yeah.
Which I think is really telling about how much weight we associate with that word.
Totally. Okay, so let's bring it all back to that initial comparison that Health Central made between despondency and depression.
Yeah.
So they said that despondency can be, a big part of depression, like a deep, long-lasting feeling.
Right.
But what we've learned is that it also has its own distinct kind of weight, right? Like this feeling of just crushing hopelessness and discouragement.
Yeah.
And that's often tied to, that feeling of futility that we talked about, that belief that, like, what's the point of even trying?
Yeah, exactly. And while that analogy of a head cold versus the flu, might give you a sense of like different levels of severity, I don't think it really captures how different those experiences are.
Right.
Both despondency, especially in its more intense forms, and depression, they're just so much bigger and more impactful than a cold.
Yeah.
It's really about the duration, how long it lasts, and how deeply it affects your whole well-being.
Yeah, and how much it like takes over your life almost, right? Okay, so as you're navigating your own, emotional landscape out there, the big takeaway is that despondent isn't just a fancy word for sad.
Right.
It means something really specific.
It does.
It carries with it this big, heavy feeling of lost hope, of profound discouragement.
Yeah.
Often rooted in that, that feeling of futility, that things aren't going to get better. What's the point of trying?
Exactly.
And even though it can be a part of depression, understanding its specific meaning, like where the word comes from, all of that stuff, can give you a more nuanced way to understand and talk about these really hard feelings.
I think that's so important.
Yeah.
Having the right words to describe what we're going through can be really powerful.
Yeah, totally. And it makes me wonder, like in a world where we're always supposed to be positive and happy, how can we, make more space to acknowledge these feelings, these really deep feelings of discouragement and hopelessness without immediately jumping to like, oh, there's something wrong with you. You need to be fixed.
Right, exactly.
But like maybe if we understood, the history of these words, where they come from, that kind of stuff, maybe we could start having more compassionate and thoughtful conversations about, the full range of human emotions.
I think that's a great point to leave our listeners with.
Yeah. Something to think about.
Yeah, something to chew on.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you then.
Bye.